There is a lawyer in Los Angeles who reaches into his mailbox on an October afternoon in 1978, and what is inside it is 4.5 feet long. He is in hospital for 6 days. He very nearly does not survive it. And the detail that tells you everything is not the snake. It is what had been done to the snake before it went in there. Somebody had removed the rattles. A rattlesnake rattles to warn you off. It does not want to bite you. Biting costs it venom it needs for food. Removing the rattle does not make the animal more dangerous to itself in any way. It only removes the warning. Somebody sat down and thought that through. The organization that put it there was called Synanon, and this is where the story goes somewhere you are not expecting. Because for its first 10 years, Synanon did something that nobody else in the United States could do. It got heroin addicts clean. Not for a weekend, not by substituting one drug for another. In the late 1950s, if you were addicted to heroin in America, the medical profession had effectively nothing for you. Hospitals discharged you. Prisons held you and released you unchanged. The relapse rates were so total that many doctors had quietly stopped regarding addiction as treatable at all. To give you the scale of what that meant, the standard figure quoted in the period for relapse after institutional treatment was somewhere upward of 90%. And the honest clinicians would tell you the real number was worse than that, because the people who relapsed mostly did not come back to be counted. This was not a field with a low success rate. It was a field with, functionally, no success rate. And in a storefront in Santa Monica, a man with no medical training, no license, no funding, and no theory beyond the one he had worked out on himself was getting people off it and keeping them off it. Journalists came, academics came, senators came. The model was studied, written up, and copied. And the thing that got copied out of it is still in use in treatment programs today. His name was Charles Diedrich. Everyone called him Chuck. 20 years later, his organization had shaved the heads of its members, ordered its married couples to divorce and take new partners, required its men to have vasectomies, declared itself a religion, and put a de-rattled rattlesnake in a lawyer's mailbox. Now, the obvious way to tell that story is as a fall, a good thing that went bad, a man who lost his mind somewhere along the way, and a method that got corrupted after it stopped being used properly. I do not think that is what happened, and the evidence is unusually good, because this organization recorded itself obsessively. Thousands of hours of its own meetings and its own broadcasts on its own tape. Here's what I think the record shows. The tool that cured the addicts and the tool that destroyed the dissenters were not two different tools. They were the same tool, working correctly both times. To see it, you have to understand what they actually did in that storefront, because it was one thing, and everything else grew out of it. They called it the game. You sit in a circle, usually a dozen or so people, in the evening, several times a week, and you take turns being taken apart. When the circle turns to you, everyone else in it attacks. Your excuses, your self-image, your appearance, the lie you told last Tuesday, the version of yourself you walked in with. Loudly, personally, with profanity, with no obligation to be fair and no requirement to be kind. Anything can be said. It is louder than you are imagining. Recordings of these sessions exist, and the first thing that strikes you is the volume. People standing up, shouting across a circle, half a dozen voices at once. It is not a therapy group as television has taught you to picture one. There is no facilitator saying, "Let us hear from everyone." It is closer to a family row that has been given a structure and a start time. There are 2 rules, and both of them matter. The first is that no one may lay a hand on anyone. The violence is entirely verbal, and it is absolute about that. The second is that it ends at the door. What is said in the game stays in the game. You come out of it, and the person who has just spent 40 minutes destroying you makes you a cup of coffee, and you are friends again. And tomorrow you may be the one doing the destroying. One more thing, and it is the detail that makes the rest of the story possible. Almost everyone in that circle had been an addict. The people attacking you had used the same excuses, run the same angles, and told the same lies, often to the same people. That is not incidental. It is the entire source of the game's authority, and it is why a professional counselor could not have run one. Now, why would that help a heroin addict? Here is the reasoning, and it is not stupid. Somebody who has been using for years has, of necessity, become an extraordinary manipulator, not because they are a bad person, because that is what the life requires. You lie to your family, your doctor, your dealer, and yourself continuously as a survival skill, until the lying is no longer a thing you do, but the shape of the person you are. And that person cannot be reached by kindness. Kindness is the easiest thing in the world for them to work around. A sympathetic counselor is a resource to be managed. Every defense they own has been tested for years against people who were trying to help. What the game does is remove the possibility of managing the room. You cannot charm 12 people who are all attacking at once and who all know exactly the move you are about to make because they have all made it themselves. There is no angle. There is no performance that works. And on the other side of that, for some people, was something they had not felt in a decade. Being seen accurately. By people who are not going to leave. That last part is doing more work than it looks. The game is survivable only because the door rule holds. If what was said in the circle followed you out of it, nobody could sit through a second session. The reason a person could be dismantled on Tuesday and function on Wednesday was the guarantee that the dismantling was bounded, and that everyone in the room would take their turn in the chair. Hold on to that, because it is the thing that later stops being true. The first mechanism is worth naming precisely, because it is the whole episode. Call it defense stripping. The game is not a therapy in the ordinary sense. It does not build anything. It removes something. Specifically, it dismantles a person's capacity to hold a private self against the pressure of the group. Read that sentence again with the addict in mind, and it is a cure. Read it with anybody else in mind, and it is something else entirely. This is the point that most tellings of this story miss, and it is the reason it is worth 25 minutes. A tool that dissolves a person's ability to resist a group is exactly what you want when the thing they are resisting is their own addiction, and the group is a room full of people who have beaten it. It is also, without modification of any kind, the most efficient compliance machine anybody in America had built. Nothing has to change for that to be true. Not the format, not the rules, not the seating. The game that broke a junkie's manipulations in 1962 is procedurally identical to the game that broke a member's objection to a new policy in 1976. The instrument has no opinion about what it is being pointed at. And this is the general lesson, so let me state it flatly. Second mechanism. An influence technique has no built-in direction. We tend to sort these methods morally, as though there were therapeutic techniques and manipulative ones, and the difference lived inside the method. It does not. It lives in who chooses the target. Confession, confrontation, sleep restriction, isolation from outsiders, public accountability, total honesty about the self. Every one of those appears in legitimate treatment, and every one of them appears in coercive groups. And the words on the page are the same words, which means the safety of any such method rests entirely on a governance question. Who decides what gets attacked? And what happens to that person's own defenses? And notice that the first question has an answer here too, and it is the same answer. In the storefront, the target was chosen by the circle. 12 people who had all been addicts went after the thing they all recognized, because they had all done it. That is a kind of check. It is peer review, conducted by shouting. Nobody in that room had the standing to aim it somewhere self-serving, because everybody in that room was going to be in the chair on Thursday. What changes over the following 15 years is not the game. It is who gets to point it, and whether that person ever sits down. Synanon has an unusually clean answer to the second question, because Diedrich said it out loud, and somebody wrote it down. On the question of the vasectomies, when it was pointed out that he had not had one, "I am not bound by the rules. I make them." There it is. The instrument that dissolved everybody's private self had one exemption, and the exemption was the man who aimed it. That is not a corruption of the design. In an organization with no external check, it is the only stable configuration the design has. So watch what the instrument gets pointed at, in order, over about a decade. In the early years, the target is the addiction, and it works well enough that the graduates do not leave. That is the first thing that goes wrong. And it goes wrong for a benign reason. Diedrich concludes that addicts cannot be sent back into the world because the world is what made them. So the program stops being a program and becomes a place to live. People stay. Then people who were never addicts start joining because the community is functioning and the 60s are happening, and it looks like the answer to something. By the early 70s, Synanon has thousands of members, property, businesses, an income, and children. Then the target moves. 1975. Everybody shaves their head, not as punishment, as a demonstration. And it is worth being precise about what it demonstrates, because a shaved head is not an arbitrary humiliation. Hair is the most ordinary way a person says, "This part of me is mine, and I chose it." Removing it, collectively, on instruction, is a statement that there is no such part left. The organization understood exactly what it was asking for. So did the members. 1976. The men are to have vasectomies. Hundreds do. Diedrich, as we have established, does not. 1977. Married couples are to divorce and take new partners, assigned. Some of these marriages are 30 years old. Hundreds of couples comply. 1974 to 75. The organization declares itself a religion, which, among other things, changes its tax position and its legal footing. Now, hold on to the obvious question because it is the right one. How do several hundred adults, most of them sober, most of them not stupid, agree to end their marriages on instruction? The answer is that by the time that instruction arrives, every one of them has spent years in a room where holding a private position against the group is the thing that gets destroyed, not punished, destroyed, verbally, by their friends, on a schedule, for their own good, with their consent, and with results they can point to. You do not need to threaten a person who has been trained for a decade out of the habit of refusing. And there is a second thing keeping them there, which is not fear and is not brainwashing. And it is the most human element in the whole account. Many of these people genuinely owed the place their lives. They were not wrong about that. When the organization that saved you from dying at 26 asks for something strange at 38, the debt is real, the gratitude is real, and both of them are load-bearing. You do not need to manufacture loyalty in somebody who is correctly grateful. You only need to keep asking. Third mechanism, escalation by increment. No single step in that list is a large jump from the step before it. A haircut from a group that already shares everything. A vasectomy from a community that has already decided together how many children it should have. A new partner in a place where the group already decides who sleeps where. Each request is small relative to the last one, and the total distance traveled is enormous. This is the same shape as the obedience finding this channel covered in its first episode. Nobody is ever asked to make the whole journey. They are asked for one more step from where they now stand. And then, in September of 1977, Diedrich makes a recording that will eventually be played to a court. The tape is labeled New Religious Posture. On it he says that they are not going to mess with the old-time turn-the-other-cheek religious postures, that their religious posture is, don't mess with us, that you can get killed dead, literally dead, that these are real threats. He was speaking to his own people, on his own equipment, for his own archive. Paul Marantz was a lawyer in Los Angeles who took cases against organizations that held people. He had won one against Synanon. A woman had been held there against her will, and he had got a judgment. 3 weeks later, he reached into his mailbox. He was in hospital for 6 days, and the venom did permanent damage. He spent much of the rest of his life on cases like the one that had nearly killed him, and he died in 2022. 2 Synanon members were arrested, and the case against them and against Diedrich was built substantially out of Synanon's own tapes because they had recorded everything, including the new religious posture. Diedrich pleaded no contest to conspiracy to commit murder in 1980. He was barred from running the organization he had built. Synanon lost its tax exemption, ran out of money and legal footing, and wound up in 1991. Diedrich died in 97. But I want to go back to the rattles, because I have been carrying that detail since the opening, and it is time to say why. Whoever prepared that snake was not trying to frighten Paul Marantz. A rattlesnake in a mailbox with its rattle intact is a threat, a warning, a message, a thing designed to make a man drop a case. Removing the rattle converts it from a message into a mechanism. It is no longer communication. It is a device for producing an outcome. That is the same move the organization had been making for 20 years, at every scale. The game was not a conversation either. It was a device for producing an outcome in a person, and its whole efficacy came from removing the thing that would let them see it coming and get out of the way. Somebody in that organization understood, at the level of craft, that a warning is a defense, and that the way to make a thing work reliably is to take the warning off it. They had been doing it to each other for 2 decades. By 1978, it was simply how they thought. Here is what makes this case genuinely difficult, and I would rather leave you with the difficulty than with a verdict. The early results were real. People who were going to die of heroin in 1960 did not die and lived decades, and said for the rest of their lives that this place saved them. Some of them said it after the snake. Some of them are still saying it. And the tool that saved them is the tool that did the rest of it. There is no version of this story where you get to keep the first half and discard the second, because they are the same mechanism running in the same room on the same people. The only thing that ever changed was the target, and the target was chosen by one man who had exempted himself from the process by which everybody else's judgment was dismantled. So the useful question is not whether attack therapy works. It plainly did work, on the thing it was built for. The useful question is the boring one, the governance one, the one nobody makes a documentary about. In any place that is entitled to take your defenses apart for your own good, a treatment program, a training, a total institution, a movement, a workplace that talks about radical candor, ask 2 questions. Who chooses the target? And who sits in the chair? In the storefront, the answer to both was the circle, and everyone, on a rota. By 1977, the answer to both was one man, and he had written down that he was not bound by the rules because he made them. That is the whole difference. Not the technique, not the shouting, not even the intent. Just the question of whether the person holding the instrument ever has to stand in front of it. Because somebody always is. And in this case, When a court finally went looking for the evidence, it was already on tape. They had recorded all of it themselves. For 20 years, they had removed everybody's ability to keep anything private. And in the end, the only person who had no privacy left was the man holding the microphone.